Hey everybody, and welcome to The Year Was, a podcast all about today. I'm your host, Michael Montalvo, and together we take the history train back in time once again to discover what makes today truly unique. For the next few minutes, we continue to gather random nuggets of trivia to make you sound smart, or just drop that little fact that makes others stop and say, hey, who invited you? Like, seriously, why are you here? On this episode, we examine the events that occurred today, May 22nd. Most people today know of Thomas Jefferson as the guy on the nickel, or the guy that wrote the Declaration of Independence, the document that Nicolas Cage stole in National Treasure. However, for fans of history, or Hamilton as the case today may be, he's known for something else. The year was 1793, and on this day, Thomas Jefferson was named the first Secretary of State of the United States. Born in 1743, Thomas Jefferson was one of the leading figures in American history. Born on his family's plantation, Shadwell, he was the third child and the eldest son. Now, Jefferson's father died when he was only a teen, and because of this, he inherited the Shadwell property before heading off to college. He went to the College of William and Mary, where he reportedly studied 15 hours and practiced playing violin for several more hours every single day. And he graduated there in 1962. Now, when I was in college, I was lucky if I studied for an hour, which probably explains why I did as poor as I did. After college, he studied law under George Wythe, as there were no formal law schools at the time. And then he began practicing law in 1767. The next year, in 1768, he began clearing a mountaintop at Shadwell, where he eventually built his home, Monticello, which, believe it or not, you can see in person in Virginia, or you can see it on the back of a nickel. From 1769 to 1775, he served as a member of Virginia's House of Burgesses, where he gained the reputation of being reserved, and gained recognition for writing a summary view of the rights of British America in 1774. I know I'm talking about a lot of stuff that people are going to see as boring, but it was this pamphlet that said British Parliament had no right to execute authority over the American colonies. In 1772, he got married to Martha, why did you say that name? Wales Skelton, and they had 6 children. But it was not to last, as in 1782, only 10 years, she died in childbirth at age 33. Of their children, only 2 survived into adulthood. He never remarried, but it's generally believed that he had more children with one of his slaves, Sally Hemings. In fact, Monticello recently restored Sally Hemings' room, which sat next to Jefferson's, and opened it up to the public. They are really only now starting to freely admit to the role she had in Jefferson's life. However, despite writing that all men are created equal, he believed African Americans to be inferior, and thought that the two races could never live peacefully. In fact, of over the 600 slaves he owned, only a handful were freed, and the majority were sold upon his death. But we'll go into that a little bit more later. Okay, so now with that backstory fully backstoried, we arrive at the American Revolution. He was selected as a delegate of the Second Continental Congress, and while not a great public speaker, he excelled at writing, and he was asked to draft the Declaration of Independence at age 33. In 1776, he resigned from the Continental Congress and was re-elected to Virginia's House of Delegates, which previously was the House of Burgesses. One of the most significant achievements of his career was the Virginia Statute for Religious Freedom, which was the forerunner to the First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution. For those who don't know, the First Amendment protects people's rights to worship as they choose. From 1779 to 1781, he served as governor of Virginia, and then from 1783 to 1784, he sat in Congress. And that brings us to 1789, where he returned to America from France, where he had spent the late 1780s after replacing Benjamin Franklin as ambassador in 1785. Upon his return to the U.S., he was appointed Secretary of State by George Washington. Jefferson would go on to clash with Washington's friend Alexander Hamilton, then would go on to be elected vice president under John Adams. He later defeated Adams in 1800 and was elected president after the House of Representatives broke a tie between him and Aaron Burr. So let's talk about the election of 1800 for a moment. In the old days, the U.S. government was set up in a way that political parties would basically have individuals run for president in a kind of mass free-for-all. The person with the most votes from the Electoral College would be elected president, and the person with the second highest number of votes would be vice president. But what happens in a tie? Well, if that should happen, then the vote was sent to the House of Representatives, where each state had the same number of votes. Jefferson and Aaron Burr were both the Democratic-Republican candidates, and each wound up with a tie of 73 votes. So, with this, it was sent to the House. The Federalists feared a Jefferson presidency and had an idea to throw the election to Burr. But Burr had previously stated he would not stand in Jefferson's way should the election end in a tie. He basically went in and said, look, if Jefferson and I have a tie, I'm not going to be in the guy's way. He can be president, I'll be vice president. Then he changed his mind. So with the vote now in the House, a majority vote was needed to win. All 7 of the delegates, controlled by Jefferson's party, voted Jefferson, in addition to Georgia, which was actually a Federalist state. 6 other Federalist states voted Burr, and 2 were left undecided. I guess because 2 didn't vote, they couldn't technically have a majority, as a vote for Jefferson would send him up and over that stalemate. Over the next 5 days, the vote was held 34 more times, with each result being the exact same, 8-6-2. No one knew what would happen if March 4th came and went with no new president, and so military action was actually considered. Hamilton began to lobby for Jefferson, but it was James Bayard, the Federalist representative from Delaware, that ultimately changed his vote and gave Jefferson the election. Now, what's tricky about this is that some sources say Bayard was given back-channel assurances that Jefferson would preserve Hamilton's financial system, maintain the Navy, and retain Federalist bureaucrats below a cabinet level. This was a claim that Jefferson would always deny. Among his presidential accomplishments was the purchase of the Louisiana Territory in 1803. Post-presidency, he sold his personal library to Congress after the British burned down the Capitol during the War of 1812. But really, he spent his post-presidential years at Monticello, where he died on January 4th, 1826, the 50th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence. In a tragic turn, due to the debt he had accumulated over his life, his mansion, his furnishings, and his slaves were sold at auction to pay off his debts. Monticello was eventually acquired by a non-profit organization, and they opened it to the public in 1954. I'd like to end this episode by talking a little bit about poetry. How quiet it is in this sick room, where on the bed a silent woman lies between 2 lovers, life and death, and all 3 covered with a sheet of pain. Sick Room by Langston Hughes. The year was 1967, and on this day, the American poet, social activist, novelist, and playwright Langston Hughes died. And that's going to do it for us today. If you're watching this on YouTube, you can find the audio version on iTunes, Podbean, Spotify, and Google Play. Links in the description. If you like the podcast and want to hear more, please give us a rate and a review. That helps me out and lets me know what direction to keep this going in. And hey, if you like it, share it with a friend. They might like it too. You can find me on social media and YouTube at the Apple Cider Club. And as always, I want to thank the Tim Kreitz Band for our musical theme. And thank you for listening. We'll see you next time.